Good evening. My name is Iliana Kohler, and as the chair of the PAA Memorial Service Committee, it is my privilege to welcome you to this year's memorial service. We gather for one of the most meaningful traditions of the Population Association of America, to pause, to remember, and to honor our colleagues we have lost over the past year. Before we begin, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the members of the PAA Memorial Service Committee, Joseph Lariscy and Sonalde Desai, who helped to organize and make this evening possible. And I also want to thank to Betsy Alofoginis, the PAA Communication and Membership Manager, for her invaluable support in organizing this event and providing the space tonight for us to come together. The colleagues we honor today made significant contributions to the field of demography. They shaped how we understand populations, mentored generations of students, and leave behind legacies of remarkable and distinguished scholarships. But we are here tonight to celebrate more than just the list of their publications or their scientific contributions. We are here to remember them as our friends, mentors, and colleagues. Behind every influential and important paper they wrote, there was a vibrant human being, a person with a sharp wit, with a generous spirit, and a deep commitment to understanding population and supporting the next generations of scholars. While we mourn their passing, we also celebrate the lasting impact they had on our lives and the warmth they brought to the Population Association of America community. As we move through this ceremony, we invite you to reflect on their lives. Let us honor their legacy as colleagues. Our colleagues have left in our field, in our classrooms, and also in our relationships, and in the relationships, to honor the relationships they built, and most importantly, to keep them in our memories. We will now begin our memorial service. To allow time to remember each of the colleagues we're honoring tonight, we have allocated approximately 6 minutes for each set of remarks. And we have to stop the service sharp at 10 o'clock. So we really ask you to keep with the time. So we will begin now. Our first colleague we honor tonight is Eugene Hammel. And our first speaker will be Magali.
Good evening. My name is Magali Barbieri, and I'm a former graduate student and a current member of the demography program at UC Berkeley, where Gene had most of his career. And I'm here to represent the Department of Demography to honor Gene Hammel's memory. So Gene was, so I think there is a picture here. So I'm going to show you a few slides that have been prepared by his son, Bruce Hammel. We had a ceremony in Berkeley in his honor, and the slideshow was much longer, but I'm just going to show you a little sample. But before that, I want you to know that Gene was an enormously influential anthropologist and demographer with major methodological and theoretical contributions to both fields. Much of his work centered on the Balkans, especially the former Yugoslavia and Croatia, as well as on Latin America, Peru in particular. He conducted groundbreaking research in many different directions, including social structure, kinship, fertility regulation in foraging populations, the impact of political crisis on population vulnerability, the role of culture in demographic patterns and trends, and even some archaeological work on the Chiricahua and the Navajo in the US. One of his most cited works examines sex bias in graduate students admission at Berkeley. And one of the reasons why it's so famous, it's because it's a perfect illustration of something called the Simpson's paradox, which is a kind of ecological fallacy. Gene was also instrumental and that's especially important for us at Berkeley. He was instrumental in reviving the Berkeley Demography Department, which is one of the most renowned demography PhD awarding program in the world. The department had been closed in 1972 due to some intellectual and political divisions among the faculty. And against all odds, thanks to Gene's vision, his tenacity, his ability to navigate the campus administration, and his diplomacy skills, he was able to reopen the department in 1979, first as a graduate program, and then in 1990 as a department. Gene was the founder of something called the Quantitative Anthropology Lab in Berkeley. He was one of the first in the early 1970s, in anthropology at least, to see the value of statistical analysis and computer power to advance research in anthropology. Gene published hundreds of well-cited articles and books. He was an elected member of the National Academy of Science, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a Guggenheim Fellow. But he also had wide-ranging interests, and I'm going to illustrate some of that now. So he traveled the world, and in particular in Latin America and in Eastern Europe. This is an illustration of his trip in California, actually. But he also went, oh, sorry, wrong slide. So anyway, he did his graduate work at Berkeley, and he did extensive field work in Peru. And this is an illustration of a book he's published on his work there. He built a Model A race car from scratch while he was in Peru. He traveled with all kinds of public transportation, and he actually loved discovering new cultures. He also had a hobby building stuff. So here he's building a stereo amplifier with his family. He loved fishing, and another of his hobbies was to collect and to repair old clocks. He made wine. He actually built a cabin in California for his family. And that's where he was making wine with friends. And he loved dogs. Gene passed in November 2025 at the age of 95 years, surrounded by family members, former students, and the many, many friends he had gained through his kindness, his dry sense of humor, his humanity, and his generosity. Thank you.
Our second speaker to honor Gene is John Wilmot. John.
Thank you, Iliana, and I know time is short, and Magali covered most of the topics, so I don't have a lot left to say, but I just want to emphasize a couple things where I think Gene's contribution was really important that all of you should know about. You know, it was really a remarkable thing that he did to revive demography at Berkeley, and so I refer to as Demography 2.0 at Berkeley. It had earlier been a very distinguished department with Judith Blake as the chair, and Kingsley Davis, who was in the Department of Sociology, and Nathan Kiefitz was there, and Sam Preston as a junior assistant professor. It was a very distinguished place, but for various reasons it fell apart. Gene had been an associate dean of the graduate school, and therefore he was well positioned to kind of revive demography at Berkeley. And he, through his connection with, oh, I'm forgetting the name, the gentleman, the English, I'm forgetting the name. Somebody at Oxford or Cambridge who he met Ken Wachter through this person. Who am I thinking of? You know what I mean? Peter Laslett, who connected Gene with Ken Wachter, and they started working on something called SOCSIM, which you may have heard about, this computer program to reconstruct families and simulate family relations and so forth. And that is a program that was written in the 70s, I believe, and it's still being used by people today. So that's pretty remarkable. When I arrived at Berkeley in 1990, it's this thing about the quantitative anthropology laboratory. Magali mentioned it, but this is really a rather unique, just the name itself is kind of stands out that it's not something that just anyone would do. And my first domain for my first email address was jrw@qal.berkeley.edu. I mean, we forget, it soon became dmog.berkeley.edu, but this background in quantitative anthropology. Another thing that, Gene really was important in terms of championing the use of ethnographic methods in demography, mixed methods, and we were training students who had grants from the Mellon Foundation to support that kind of work, and he was really a champion of these sort of mixed methods approaches. And he also proposed and championed the creation of a joint degree in sociology and demography at Berkeley, which was lacking, and he realized that this is what students needed in order to improve their academic chances on the job market. And he did, that was, I think, one of his major contributions. So he also, his work in culture and demography was very important, and he published an article in 1990 in PDR called A Theory of Culture for Demography. So I think those are some of the major things that he did, and I know time is short, so I will end it at that. He was a very dear person for all of us who knew him well, and he will be missed.
Thank you, John. Next, we will honor Richard Alba, and Mara Shefto will share her remarks. You can move. No, you don't have a slideshow.
No. Hi, I'm Mara Sheftel. I'm really honored to share some words of remembrance of Richard Alba, my mentor, colleague, and friend. So since hearing about Richard's passing last spring, I have been reflecting on the legacy he left me to carry as one of his last students. Richard's tremendous contribution to our understanding of immigration and integration inspires me as an early career scholar. This fall, at a memorial organized by his family, a wide representation of colleagues from across his lifetime of work spoke about the empirical rigor and theoretical sophistication he brought to the study of immigration in the US and in cross-national comparison. His research centered on immigrant assimilation and fundamentally reshaped how scholars understand the processes through which immigrants integrate into and transform US society. His widely cited book, Remaking the American Mainstream with Victor Nee, introduced a game-changing theory of assimilation that addressed contemporary immigration patterns. The book quickly became a landmark in immigration studies, reshaping scholarly debates and influencing public discourse. More recently, Richard often wrote for public audiences and was skilled in translating demographic data and theoretical frameworks into stories that speak to a range of readers. This was reflected in a review of his 2020 book, The Great Demographic Illusion, in Foreign Affairs, which praised the book for its admirable absence of jargon, noting that Alba's data-driven but fully accessible work advances an original and important idea that, if correct, will have major societal consequences. And Richard was widely recognized for these contributions. Among his many honors were his election to the National Academy of Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, as well as he was a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, fellowships from Russell Sage Foundation, Stanford University, Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Richard's productivity and dedication to scholarship were awe-inspiring. He wrote and edited 14 books and authored hundreds of articles and book chapters. And at age 65, after nearly 30 years at SUNY Albany, where he had founded the Center for Social and Demographic Analysis and had become a distinguished professor, when most people may have just retired, he joined the CUNY Graduate Center as a distinguished professor. Richard's productivity was a product of his admirable discipline. I remember our early morning meetings when he had already met his writing goal for the day by 7 a.m. His dedication to intellectual inquiry and discipline continues to guide me. And I had the honor of speaking at the celebration of Richard's retirement from CUNY a few years ago, and then more recently at his memorial locally. And at both occasions, speakers reflected with awe and gratitude on all of these scholarly contributions that I've been talking about. But just as striking as his intellectual legacy, every speaker also emphasized Richard's extraordinary generosity and kindness, his willingness to listen, to engage seriously with others' ideas, and to do so respectfully even when he disagreed, which he did often. And as his collaborator, Nancy Foner, said at his memorial there, in addition to being a brilliant scholar and a wonderful writer, he was a wonderful person. This is what I most aspire to carry forward, Richard's approach to mentorship and collaboration. So I first met Richard even before I began my doctoral program. We lived in the same neighborhood. We lived in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn, and so we met at a local coffee shop to talk about my academic aspirations. And from that very first meeting, Richard treated me as an intellectual equal. That simple act gave me confidence to see myself as a scholar, and that was even before I took one single graduate class or wrote a single paper. He met my ideas with excitement and confidence. When I proposed a dissertation topic that was slightly off the beaten path, he didn't flinch. His encouragement carried me forward through the toughest moments, like when I had to abandon a year's worth of data and start over. But Richard's mentorship wasn't just about encouragement, it was also about honesty. So he never hesitated to tell me when I was getting in my own way or when a chapter needed to be shelved for a future paper. His directness was really a gift. Minjo reflected on this in her ASA tribute to Richard, saying that he had the rare ability to combine high expectations with deep empathy. And I think that's really unique. He invested in my success with extraordinary generosity. So he would give me big picture guidance and then meticulous line edits, and often with astonishing speed. So I sent him the full draft of my dissertation during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, at 1:50 a.m. And I was so excited to get it off my desk and thought, okay, I'll have a few days when I don't have to think about this. And by 8 p.m. that night, he had already read and commented on it in detail, which was also amazing. Richard never believed in the idea of a former student. We met semi-regularly in the years since I finished my PhD, most recently last February, just before he passed away. And that was as the current administration started to barrage the academic community with changes to research priorities. And as someone who is dependent on federal funding for my job, he helped me think through how to adapt my research agenda to make it fundable, but stay true to my goal of providing scientific evidence base to improve population health and reduce disparities. So I always imagine many more years of neighborhood coffees and idea exchanges. He passed away rather quickly, and so while those meetings are no longer possible, Richard's guidance and wisdom remain with me, and I'm profoundly grateful for that. He shaped my understanding of what it means to be an impactful scholar, but also my understanding of what it means to be a generous intellectual mentor and colleague. And I will carry his legacy on this forward in my scholarship and in how I mentor and strive to uplift future generations of scholars, guided by the same commitment to clarity, intellectual integrity, generosity, and kindness that he modeled so effortlessly. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about him. It really is an honor to memorialize him. Thank you.
Doc Ewbank will be first remembered by Hiram Beltran Sanchez.
Thank you, Iliana, and thank you everyone for being here. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep it short because I wanna give opportunity to Michelle Guillot to also say some words. So I'm gonna take the perspective from the student perspective. That's how I met Doc Ewbank when I was a grad student at the graduate program in demography, University of Pennsylvania. I'm gonna let Michelle give a little more perspective on his background and the trajectory that Doc had in demography. But I just wanna emphasize, from my perspective, I had Doc as a professor. I took at least 3 classes from him. He was also my mentor in what we call the second year paper in the program. And he ended up also being in my dissertation committee. So I met Doc over the years, and he was always a very supportive mentor. What was especially important to me is that I got into the program with a math background, which was not very good in writing and reading social stuff. But Doc was actually the first one who really encouraged me to use my math skills and to try to excel on those and try to apply them to my work. And in fact, it was because of him actually that I started merging into programming, because he introduced us to the use of Excel files. that I didn't know how useful they could actually be in demographic analysis until I took classes with Doc. And even now, most of my demographic courses, I continue to use Excel files because it was very useful to me to see how important they could be. You might remember some of the work that Doc did early 2000s with PAA and survival, when he actually created a very simple, relatively simple, but very useful way of maximizing likelihood functions in a life table function. He actually showed us how to do it in Excel. So for me, it was like an eye-opening thing that I would actually see how things were working, and he would. I still remember, picturing a dog and the whiteboard showing us as he was changing numbers and running the routine to maximize the function, how we could see the actual parameters coming up. So it was really eye-opening for me to actually see what I knew a little bit the math behind the scenes, but actually see what the numbers actually how it worked. So he encouraged me to use some of his work to try to translate it into R, and that's actually why I started doing into programming that I now do quite a lot. So in a lot of the work that I now do, it has to do with all the encouragement that Doc provided me over the years in using, again, trying to use my strength in my background in math and my background in programming that I eventually ended up using quite a lot. And this is not only for me. I've been talking to some of my colleagues, friends of mine who also were part of the demography program, who actually also share that for them it was very eye-opening when they actually saw those Excel files, that actually they could see physically like manipulating numbers and see how things were coming out. That was quite important for us. And that these simulations, in the way I see it, importantly, that they became not only a general tool for us, but also, very importantly, he always keep an eye on having things based on demographic principles. So he always brought me back. Every now and then I went through the roots and doing all the stuff with math, and he was like always bringing me back, like, you need to bring it back to the demographic principles. So I'm very thankful for Doc for all the support that he provided. That is always very important to me, and it has been very important to many of my colleagues, my friends who are now in faculty positions. So I want to share this very important contribution from Doc, and it's something that I continue to do in my teaching. Thank you.
So good evening, I'm Michel Guillot, and I will actually read remarks about Doug Ewbank that Sam Preston wrote and asked me to deliver on his behalf. So I, meaning Sam, I appreciate the opportunity to make a few remarks about Doug Ewbank. Doug and I overlapped at Penn for 3 decades. For much of that time, we saw one another almost daily as we joined other faculty for lunch in the atrium of the McNeil building. At these gatherings, Doug would display his wide-ranging interests and his quiet, quirky sense of humor. Doug was a gentleman who did not engage in self-promotion, a true Quaker in that regard. Only by reading his work and listening to the opinions of specialists could one recognize what an extremely talented scholar he was. Even then, it is difficult to do the adding up because he contributed to so many different fields. These include the history of African American mortality, factors responsible for the expansion of American longevity in the 20th century, new model life tables, health programs in Africa, and patterns of age misreporting in developing countries. Perhaps most impressively, he was a trailblazer in combining core elements of demography and genetics. He developed a highly original approach to estimating the mortality risk associated with the APOE4 genotype, the most dangerous genotype associated with Alzheimer's disease. His estimates have stood the test of time and are still cited today. Most of this research was accomplished after he suffered a devastating paralysis, which affected his mobility, but not his productivity or his spirit. His was truly a life well lived. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Michael White to honor Calvin Goldscheider.
Thank you. I'm privileged to make some remarks about our late colleague, Calvin Goldscheider, who passed away on January 13th at the age of 84. At Brown University, Calvin was the Ungerleider Professor of Judaic Studies, Professor of Sociology, and a faculty associated at the Population Studies and Training Center, PSTC. I enjoyed and benefited from Calvin's collegiality at Brown and from my arrival in 1989 through his retirement and then beyond. Born in 1941, Calvin received his BA from Yeshiva University and earned his MA and PhD from Brown in 1964. He held academic appointments at the University of Southern California, University of California, Berkeley, and Brandeis University. At the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Calvin chaired the Department of Demography. He returned to Brown in 1984, where he remained until his retirement in 2005. Calvin was a prolific author, publishing 30 books and more than 100 articles. Among his major works are The Transformation of the Jews with Alan Zuckerman in 1984, Cultures in Conflict, 2002, and Israeli Society in the 21st Century, 2015. His scholarship was marked by its originality, intellectual independence, and sustained attention to social change, diversity, and the fate of Jewish communities in Israel, the United States, and beyond. In recognition of his scholarly contributions, Professor Goldscheider received numerous honors, including the Marshall Sklar Award of the Association for Jewish Studies in 2001. Calvin was also a committed teacher and mentor across disciplines. He taught courses on Israeli society, the American Jewish community, family and demography, and research methods. He was one of the leading scholars whose thinking and analysis helped reshape Judaic studies. Our colleague Phil Brown recalled how Calvin taught a class on Jewish-Black relations at a time when there was little academic attention to that area, and how he helped found the field of Judaic studies focus on more current social science rather than on strictly biblical topics. Many of Calvin's students remained close to him for long after their formal studies ended, and many went on to become scholars in sociology, Judaic studies, and Israeli studies. Upon hearing of Calvin's passing, many wrote very warmly about his impact on them, and you'll hear more about these connections in a moment from Sharon. Calvin keenly supported our community of scholars in sociology and the PSCC at Brown. I was one of those beneficiaries. Calvin encouraged my research and service contribution within the institution, and I'm gratified that Calvin included my work, co-authored with Sharon, in his edited volume, Population, Ethnicity, and Nation Building. I was fortunate to be a guest of Calvin and Fran at their home in Providence and their lakeside retreat in Lake George, New York. Calvin survived by Frances Goldscheider, his wife of 42 years, and a scholar very well known to the world of demography and the membership of PAA. Their survivors include Calvin and Fran's children, Judah, Abigail, Sarah, and Janet, and 8 grandchildren. Calvin's late brother, Harvey Goldscheider, was a rabbi in Baltimore, and his younger sister, Ethel Fisher, resides in Jerusalem. Now to Sharon.
Thank you, Michael. I have the very good fortune to reflect on Calvin's more personal side. To make sure I represented the memories of his graduate students who were in cohorts ahead of me and behind, I've reached out to gather a few reflections, and I've been getting far too much that I can say in 3 minutes from many of his former students, all of whom provided the broad consensus that Calvin was a welcoming force. When he decided that you were one of the family, he moved mountains to make sure that you felt you belonged. He did this in a myriad of ways, by pulling you into his academic world, inviting you into his home, and making sure that wherever you went, you were introduced to a lot of people. In my first semester in graduate school, I remember feeling like I was floundering because I had not come from a background in sociology, and the theory classes were, to put it nicely, kicking my butt. I went to talk with Calvin, who was my advisor, about my feelings that I was not well prepared, and Calvin set me a very challenging reading list, introducing me to what at the time was the cutting-edge sociological readings on race and ethnicity, and telling me I needed to think comparatively because my background had been in Judaic studies. So every week, he would set me a book or two to read, not the entire stack of journals that Calvin told me he had read when he had come to graduate school over a weekend. But then we would meet and discuss, and every week I would write something up that was totally inadequate, And at the end of the semester, he set me a few questions for a final paper. And it's my firm belief that he gave me an encouragement grade, a sign that with a lot more hard work, I too could master this area. I have also heard from many of his other students that they felt the same way, and I hadn't shared my story. So I heard many stories of how he pushed them, he encouraged them, and he made us feel like with just another book, we would have mastered something. Esther Wilder told me that Calvin once sent her 6 single-spaced pages of comments on a dissertation chapter, written with love, she said, right? A little overwhelming, but very helpful. Calvin modeled how to explore something thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, and one might say passionately. He taught with great enthusiasm. I heard from various people about remembering his very energetic style of teaching. He also had the knack for pushing with kindness. He did expect you to work very hard, but he was very generous with comments and always acted like he really thought your paper could amount to something. But he pushed us very hard. So another friend we both were in a graduate seminar with him, and we were both told by dentists in the same year that we needed to stop grinding our teeth. We were worried that we would fall short of Calvin's expectations and not be able to discuss thoroughly enough in our class of 3. Yes, they let you teach graduate seminars with only 3 students back then. Most of all, he allowed us to be enthusiastic about our interests, to ask stupid questions while telling us that there was no such thing as a stupid question, even though most of us know as teachers that there really are some stupid questions, and to feel like we were gaining in knowledge. Lori Hunter told me that she remembers Calvin at the regular seminars in Zimmer Hall, looking around to see which trainee would ask our visiting speakers a question, encouraging us to join in the intellectual fray. Perhaps it was to check in and make sure that we were actually there, but it always felt like it was more as a kindred soul engaging us to join in the intellectual life of the department. As Michael said, Calvin also excelled in welcoming us into the life of a professor by inviting us into the home, actually homes that he shared with Fran, for frequent dinners, holiday and regular. Many of his graduate students shared fond memories of being initially nervous about being invited to the Providence home for a meal, most of which Calvin cooked. Fran and Calvin also welcomed colleagues and former students and friends into their Lake George house. I know many of you also shared meals with Fran and Calvin in their DC apartment, which we retreated to whenever the PAAs were held there for lovely dinners and singing. And Calvin also brought along the shared dinners on the road. At every PAA outside of DC, one could count on Friday night dinner in whatever location Calvin and Fran were, where dinner was always an interesting assortment of items that could be cobbled together from a hotel menu. Breaking bread together, or actually challah, and talking about articles or books or the latest results or interests over a meal, and often good wine, was a regular part of how Calvin demonstrated interest in those around him. These shared meals in many different locations stand out to me as one of the more grounding and welcoming actions Calvin regularly engaged in, where he took the opportunity to ask, "How are you?" And more recently, he would ask, "Are you happy?" Calvin would appreciate knowing that we've been sending each other memories and connecting again to share in how much he meant to us in our academic and professional journeys. We will miss you, Calvin.
Avery Mason, Pete Guest will be remembered by Catherine Curtis.
Unassuming. This is the word that was offered to me to describe Pete more than 20 years ago, when I was a new graduate student in the sociology program at the University of Washington. And while this word does indeed accurately characterize Pete, it risks concealing the depth and richness of his many professional contributions made over 6 decades, which began in 1967 as one of over 100 graduate students who were admitted into the University of Wisconsin-Madison sociology program and a handful of students affiliated with the Center for Demography and Ecology, followed by a 2-year stint as an assistant professor at Dartmouth College, and then a long and remarkable career at the University of Washington Department of Sociology and Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology, or affectionately known as CSDE. As Pete's longtime colleague, Charlie Hirschman, acknowledges in his history of that population center, Pete Guest was the faculty member who served the longest and left the deepest legacy on the CSD institutional culture and graduate students. I'm grateful to be a small part of Pete's legacy, which includes CSDE, as well as CDE, the PAA, and the field of demography more broadly. I first met Pete when I was in my very early days of graduate school, where I came with the intention of becoming a criminologist. I took Pete's class on demography at the recommendation of an advanced crim student. My career took an immediate and sharp and permanent turn toward demography after only 1 quarter with Pete. He was an inspiring and encouraging teacher, pragmatic, engaging, humorous, and rigorous. I was among many graduate students Pete inspired and lured into demography. Notably, Pete's methods of allure were not flash or shine or anything remotely glamorous. He did not lead with or even eventually openly share his many accomplishments. His contributions I learned about from others. Pete didn't talk about how he had edited the Journal of Demography, that he was a successful PI on numerous NICHD grants, or that he led CSDE through one of its more critical periods, and reflecting his particular style of leadership, helped reaffirm the center's identity by enlisting Indigenous American artist Marvin Oliver to redesign the center's logo, the one that we see today, showing salmon, the keystone species of the Pacific Northwest, giving birth, migrating, and in death, the 3 primary demographic processes. I didn't learn from Pete that he was among the radical graduate students in demography at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who founded the Journal of Concerned Demography. That, too, I learned from others. Pete's graduate school colleague and later faculty colleague at UW, Charlie Hirschman, again describes Pete as the effort's intellectual leader, given the respect his peers had for him and his ability to write quickly and humorously. The articles in Concerned Demography, which ran from the late 60s to the early 70s, called to question the lack of interest and serious engagement with social issues at the PAA, at our meetings, and among PAA leadership. Pete and his collaborators pushed back against the problematic racist overpopulation arguments dominant within the field, the pervasive marginalization of women and people of color within the organization, and the continued lack of student incorporation within the organization. Pete did not share any of this with me. Instead, Pete shared with me self-effacing tales of his professional experiences. He shared with me how very early in his career he had submitted a manuscript to Demography, and the editor, who was Beverly Duncan at the time, thought the content was so important and the writing so terrible that rather than desk rejecting the manuscript, she offered to help him rewrite the paper. Indeed, when I asked Pete about his accomplishments at various points in our 2 decades-long relationship, he would smile, laugh out loud, and then tell me about the contributions and successes of the other people involved in those efforts. This is how I learned about his prestigious mentors, Leo Schnorr and Hal Winsborough, his celebrated colleagues, and his many accomplished students. A large share of Pete's articles were co-authored with these outstanding and respected graduate students. Pete contributed to the field through his research, advancing what are now classic theories of urban sociology and human ecology in numerous substantive areas. In his own reflections shared with his son Andrew and his wife Chris, he felt strongest about his work linking sociological and historical studies, specifically studies of changing social stratification in the US, the ways that metropolitan areas developed spatially, the nature of social and political attitudes in the US. In his research, Pete infused a consistent attention to the complicated and rich intersection of people with their communities and their histories, and he had fun doing it. Pete's also contributed to our field by successfully mentoring, in his words, some very good PhDs in sociology, and by intentionally co-authoring with graduate students. Reflected on Pete's expansive publication record is a genealogy of his research legacy, one born out of an enduring commitment to mentoring early career scholars on how to conduct research that is socially relevant, empirically robust, and ethically conducted. Pete's legacy reflects his conscientiousness and his integrity, the very features that contribute to his overall, well-known, unassuming demeanor. A demeanor that risks distracting us from the true weight of his impact on the field. In these few minutes, I invite us both to acknowledge and to look beyond Pete's exceptional humility, to take a moment to express our gratitude for his consistent directing and redirecting the spotlight on others, to pull back the curtain just a bit to shine light on Pete's true prominence. The incredible reach and depth of this concerned demographer's legacy that informs the way we do our science and the way we build our scientific community. Thank you, Pete, for the quiet, constant, and principled gift of your legacy.
Mark Mather will remember Tom Merrick.
Tom Merrick was president of PRB during the 1980s to the early 1990s, and he was influential in the fields of population and development, and contributed to many studies on child mortality, reproductive health, and health sector reform. I joined PRB in 1998, which was after Tom's stint as president, so I knew him mainly from when he came back to PRB later as a visiting fellow, but I brought some notes along with me from colleagues who also knew him in his earlier years at PRB. And it's clear that Population Reference Bureau was very central to Tom's life. He helped build the organization into the trusted, nonpartisan source that it is today. And he set very high standards for us. He was precise and intellectually rigorous, but he was also very warm and cheerful and generous with his time. He helped us win our first big USAID grant, funding that we were able to sustain for 35 years. And PRB is where he met his wife, Elaine Murphy. I'm told that they kept this mostly secret and then sort of quietly went off one day and got married. And I guess it wasn't a very well-kept secret because his first day back in the office, the staff had changed his nameplate to Mr. Elaine Murphy. Tom hired many people into their first jobs in Washington, and then he would keep track of them, sometimes for decades, I'm told. One colleague told me that long after she had left PRB, she could still count on Tom to respond quickly with thoughtful comments on whatever she was working on. If something needed doing, Tom often did it himself, including finding time to work in the field in many countries while he was running the organization. He was notoriously frugal, so when traveling, he would save every receipt for every cup of coffee, every bottle of water, rather than taking the standard per diem that most of us did. He cared deeply about communication, about saying things clearly and briefly, and his edits made people better writers. And that's another lesson that stayed with us at PRB. It's still part of our DNA today. He cared about people in ways that were often quiet but lasting. He donated one of his speaker's honorarium to the woman who took care of our office plants. He took interns out to lunch regularly. And when he was teaching at Georgetown, he held an annual welcome party for demography students at his house. Everyone who knew Tom seems to agree that there's not a negative thing that you could say about him, which is a rare thing to be able to say about anybody.
I'd like to invite Stan Becker to speak about Hilary Page. Thank you, Stan.
Good evening. Much of this text was contributed by Hilary's husband, Ron Lestag, with some further insights from Georges Renier of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and also from myself. Hilary graduated with both a BA and MA from Cambridge University with a major in geography. Her Africa connection predated this. Between finishing high school and in London and the English A and O levels exams, she traveled to Kenya and spent her time on a remote farm of Swiss settlers teaching English to 4 boys who were growing up as Switzer Deutsch, white Kikuus, sorry. Thereafter, she traveled down the Nile from Lake Victoria to Alexandria, and that is what she did at age 18, on board barges through the swamps of what is now South Sudan to Kampala, then by train to Aswan, and then down the Nile to Alexandria. That got her bitten by the Africa bug. After her MA, she took a job at the University of Dar es Salaam with the task of mapping the settlements in the Arusha district in preparation for the first Tanzanian census. That's how she got in touch with demography and the African project at Princeton, led by Frank Lorimer, William Brass, and Ansley Cole. As indirect estimation techniques were pioneered at Princeton, Hilary stayed on and started her PhD there at the Sociology Department Office, OPR, under Ansley's supervision. She graduated in 1973. She met Ron Lestag there, and they married Christmas Day in 1971. Building on the Cole-Trussell model describing age patterns of fertility, Hilary coined what became known as the Page model of fertility. It emphasizes voluntary birth control is better understood as a function of both age and marriage duration. Together with Ron, she led an important program of work with a geographic focus on sub-Saharan African countries, and specifically Nigeria. She led the Lagos Parity Study, showing that breastfeeding and postpartum abstinence were key fertility-limiting mechanisms, often acting as a substitute for modern contraception. A few years later, she moved with Ron to Belgium. There she was in charge of the course on indirect estimation for graduate students at the Inter-University Program in Demography, IPD, at the Vrije Universiteit Bruxelles, VUB. In addition, she learned Dutch and taught undergraduate courses in statistics and demography at the University of Ghent for 25 years. Owing to her British heritage, she quickly gained the reputation of professor with the most charming Dutch accent. No official awards were landed for this, but it was appreciated firsthand by over 300 students each year. In Belgium, her research pivoted around 2 national surveys of Turkish and North African migrant populations and their descendants. These were key in documenting the rapid adoption of reproductive regimes resembling that of the host population, and refuted populist and right-wing claims that migrant populations drain national security systems. From Georges Renier, he said the Page-Lestag combo was instrumental in shaping my trajectory as a young social scientist, and I would have been never been able to call myself a demographer without contributions of both Ron and Hilary. After graduation, Hilary had a vacancy for an RA on work on the second Belgian migration survey. It turned out to be an incredibly rewarding research collaboration for which Georges is grateful to this day. For myself, I first got to know Hilary when I joined the IPD, Inter-University Program in Demography at the VUB, Vrije Universiteit Bruxelles, in 1982. Ron was the boss, but Hilary was more approachable, especially for personal things. For example, questions I had about life in Belgium, grief when my brother was killed in a motor vehicle accident, and advice or pointers when I fell in love with someone in Belgium. Hilary passed away June 13, 2025, at the age of 81. She is survived by Ron, children David and Claire, and 5 grandchildren. She touched quite a few of us and will be remembered for her work and her kind manner. Thank you.
Technical issue here. Okay, now it worked. Yasuhiko Saiot will be remembered by Eileen Crimmins and Will Dow. Eileen.
I feel like this is a little bit demographically upside down because I was Saito's mentor, not his student. So that's not how it's supposed to happen. Saito graduated from the University of Southern California, where he came and he actually worked with my husband in his dissertation, which was on attitudes changing among young people in the United States. But I had the money to provide him with a research assistantship, so he worked for me for his entire graduate career, and he actually fell in love with active life expectancy and aging and those things, and he quickly turned to that professionally. And we did the first papers on healthy life expectancy for the United States. And he really embraced the sort of study of mortality, morbidity, and the combination into active life expectancy. He participated every year in the group called REVS, which is the International Network on Active Life Expectancy. And when he went home to Japan a few years after his degree, he really nurtured and started this group, a REVS Asia group. And he was very important in sort of promoting demographic work in Asia. He did a 6-wave study that was nationally representative in Japan. People said it couldn't be done, but he did it. He subsequently worked in Singapore with people at the university there, and he did studies, collected data in Singapore, Philippines, Vietnam, a number of places. He was very big on data collection and promoting its use in Asia. He invited us all to Asia several times for meetings. Although he was a little embarrassed with our behavior, we were never quite as good at obeying the rules as you should be in Japan. He sort of led us through and got us through not getting punished for our bad behavior. Saito came to USC because he had spent summers at Hawaii at a summer institute. And that's how important those things are. He became converted at that summer institute to the idea that he should do demographic studies, and that's why he came to USC. He subsequently offered summer sessions at the University of Hawaii, probably 6 to 8 years. He always gave back. He was always giving, always mentoring, always providing help for people. And when he died a month ago, most people were not expecting it. And I got so many emails where everybody said, he was such a good person, such a good person. And that's how everyone remembers him. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen spoke about Saito as his mentor and about some of his accomplishments as a demographer. I just want to represent some of the folks who are mentored by Saito, because really that's how so many people around sort of East and Southeast Asia remember Saito, is what he gave to so many. I first met him in 1998 when I went to Japan looking for connections and demographic connections, and I was bowled over by him welcoming me, supporting me, arranging for me to come back time and time again to Japan, introducing me to so many in his network, and I learned just how big his network was around Southeast Asia and the studies that he helped people start, as Eileen said, in Vietnam and Philippines. And he had a particular connection in recent years in Singapore. So several of his mentees in Singapore are here today. And a couple of them who couldn't be here today just sent some remarks that they asked me to read. So from Abhijit Visaria, a demographer trained at Penn, Professor Saito is a wonderful colleague and a dear friend. I first met him in 2017. He was teaching a workshop on healthy life expectancy. And I realized right away that I had found a mentor and a sounding board for my own research. In fact, my first 2 papers at Duke and US were co-authored with him. He was incredibly committed to his work, and his legacy in health expectancy research will endure through his workshops, papers, collaborations, and his leadership in advancing tools such as IMOC and SPACE. One of my fondest memories of Saiot is from Venice in May 2023, he writes. After the Rev conference in Padova, I spent an afternoon walking the Rialto Bridge, boat rides, beers, dinner at a small cafe, relaxed, cheerful, enjoying a rare moment of downtime between his constant travels. It's one of my life's great honors, he says, to have known Saiot, and he will miss him dearly. His wife, Kriti Vikram, also speaks about how he's exceptionally generous, embodied generativity. He constantly encouraged her all the right times in her career when she was looking for her place. Every time he was in Singapore, he would remember to bring cookies for her son. She remembers those special moments, visiting her family, bringing gifts, always unexpected. His passing is a significant loss for the academic community and for those who knew him well, she says, a deeply personal one. We will always be grateful for his guidance and friendship, and he will be greatly missed.
Iqbal Shah will be remembered by Stan Becker.
I have the Europeans, excuse me, tonight. These comments were prepared by Tom Pullum and myself, including information from the WHO and IUSSP obituaries, which you may have seen. Iqbal was our friend and colleague for more than 40 years. Iqbal was born in Lahore, Pakistan. Throughout his life, he frequently returned to Lahore to visit his family. I first met Iqbal in 1974 when both of us were graduate students in the Population Dynamics Department of Johns Hopkins. Iqbal a master's student and me a doctoral student. For 2 years, we rented a row house together less than 2 blocks from school. In 1982, we met again in Brussels, where Iqbal was completing a doctorate, and I was a research assistant in the inter-university program in demography that I mentioned in Hilary's talk at the Université Bruxelles. We both had connections with WFS in London, where Tom and met Iqbal. They worked with John Casterline and Fatima Juarez on patterns of fertility change in selected countries. In 1985, Iqbal began his career at the World Health Organization, his primary affiliation until 2012. He worked in the human reproduction program and took on an increasing degree of responsibility there. Iqbal had 2 kinds of activities at WHO. First, he worked on safe abortion. The objective was to promote policies and programs that would minimize globally the incidence of unsafe abortions. The activity was politically sensitive. It should not have been, but it was, and it continues to be controversial. Most notable was his role in the development of WHO's first ever guideline on safe abortion, an enduring accomplishment that has protected the health and rights of women worldwide. His work also contributed to building social science research on wide-ranging aspects of sexual and reproductive health and rights. He was co-editor of a 2012 supplement of the International Journal of Gynecology and Obstetrics on improving access to medical abortion in developing countries. Iqbal approached reproductive health from the perspective of the individual woman, often in relation to her partner. He came up with research questions that connected with real people, even if difficult to answer with typical survey data like DHS. Here are 2 examples of such questions. How do couples navigate the dual functions of a condom as a method of contraception and a method to prevent HIV/STD risk? What about hidden contraception? For example, some women use hormonal contraception but do not tell their husbands. Iqbal worked with John Cleland and Muhammad Ali on several rounds of analyses of contraception dynamics, failure, discontinuation, and switching using calendar data from DHS. His second activity at WHO could be described as capacity strengthening for researchers in low and middle-income countries. He led a series of initiatives in different geographic regions. In-country researchers would apply with a proposal, would get research support over a period of a couple of years, and prepare a publishable report. The program included workshops on research methods and design and finalized reports. Iqbal had a great influence on the selection of topics for these initiatives. Iqbal had a long collaboration with Buffett Foundation that supported abortion-related work at WHO. When Iqbal reached compulsory retirement age for WHO in 2012, he became a visiting scientist at the Department of Global Health and Population, Harvard School of Public Health. He and his family also obtained Swiss citizenship. Geneva continued to be their base, even during the years working in Boston. From 2021 until his death, he devoted time to work in his native Pakistan, collaborating with colleagues at the Pop Council. He co-authored an article estimating induced abortion in Pakistan with Zeba Sattar, Sushila Singh, and colleagues. Yet for all the awards and accolades, it was Iqbal's profound humanity that truly defined him. He was a mentor of rare kindness, a colleague of unwavering support, and a friend of gentle, quiet strength. His humility and selflessness made every interaction meaningful. He listened intently, accommodated diverse perspectives, guided wisely, and lifted others with a generosity of spirit that inspired all who were fortunate to know him. His work was not just a profession, but a testament to his belief in a more just and caring world. He had an infectious sense of humor. Because of Iqbal, Tom had a nearly continuous connection with WHO beginning in the late 80s. Iqbal funded a project in Baluchistan, Pakistan on couples and contraception that I proposed with a Pakistani colleague. Tom and his wife stayed with Iqbal and Kim in Geneva for several days in mid-December. When they said goodbye, they had no idea that Iqbal had only 2 weeks of life remaining. It was an incredible shock to hear from their son Daniel that Iqbal had died. He is survived by his wife, Oyang Kim, son Daniel, 2 sisters, and a brother. We share their loss. Those of us who knew and worked with Iqbal were very fortunate. He leaves behind a luminous legacy that touched countless lives around the globe. And have I got time to tell a funny story? Okay. So as you heard when I talked about Hilary, I fell in love in Belgium and eventually moved in with my wife-to-be, and he helped me move. We got a U-Haul and whatever, and she was up on the second floor, and I was bringing a mattress, and he carried it up, and my wife was at the top, and I was down the car, and she stopped him and said, "Don't bring that up here." It had a big spot on the bottom or something. I don't know. It was on my floor, so I didn't see that side of it, right? Anyway, so he brought it back down, and I said, "No, I'm going to sleep on that and take it up." So he gets up to the landing, and she says the same thing. "Don't bring that up here. I'm not going to." This is my wife-to-be, right? Anyway, and finally, I think after the third time, he stayed down the landing. He said, "You guys figure this out." He was tired of carrying up and down the. Yes, and eventually, as many of you know, the wife won out on the homemaking things, so we got something new to sleep on. Thank you. Iqbal was very generous with his time and energy. And thank you.
Eric Johnson will share his remarks about John Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau, we're very grateful to you for honoring John Thompson. John first came to the Census Bureau in 1975. Over the next few decades, he served in many different roles, rising up through the ranks until he was the Associate Director for Decennial Census Programs. In this position, he was the Senior Career Executive responsible for all aspects of the 2000 census. John helped pioneer the use of state-of-the-art technology in optical scanning and intelligent character recognition. His pursuit of technology and efficiency in the decennial census is well known. Much of what he envisioned is still in place today. After the 2000 census, John went to work at the National Opinion Research Center, or NORC, at the University of Chicago. In 2008, he became the president and CEO of NORC and held that position until 2013, when he was asked by President Barack Obama to become the 24th director of the Census Bureau. He had a unique path, a career guy who later became the political director. Because of this, there was tremendous internal respect for his path from the ranks. He understood where staff were coming from. As director, John traveled to meet with stakeholders. He especially liked to travel to new places, and there were certain things that people came to expect when traveling with John. For instance, he loved to drive and always insisted on being the driver, even though he was the director, and they usually had staff to drive them. In fact, he drove the entire state of North Dakota, from Fargo to Bismarck to Williston. And in California, he drove from Los Angeles to Redmond to San Diego. He also loved whenever traveling to have a big meal at the end of the day, preferably steak and red wine. And he liked to have the staff on the trip at the dinner so that everyone could talk about the day and get to know each other. He didn't believe in having dinner with just the senior staff, but he included everyone. I had the opportunity to meet with John a few times when he was the director. I was part of a research group that focused on the undercount of young children in the decennial census. John had decades of experience with the census operations, and I expected that he would tell us some insight about collecting or processing the data. But he wisely told us to think about the social and economic changes that we've seen over the last couple decades and how that might affect the undercount. His suggestion helped open a new path for us in our research that focused on household structure. It was very insightful. In preparing for these remarks, I had discussions with a couple of past and current census employees. Craig Robinson, who some of you might know, said that John was always engaging and very fun to be around. Greg also said that John was a strong advocate of the demographic analysis program, which is one of our 2 coverage measures that we have for the decennial census. I led the 2020 demographic analysis program, and after John was director, I had several conversations with him, actually here at PAA in between sessions or waiting for a session to start, where he'd ask me about our progress on the demographic analysis. And he was truly supportive of that program and the work we did. Nicholas Jones remembers John as a very jovial guy who was always fun to travel with. He also said that John was a big champion of the efforts of the Census Bureau to improve race and ethnicity data. Nicholas told me a story about when John was director, and they participated in a tribal consultation. So these are meetings between the Census Bureau and American Indian Alaska Native groups. On this particular trip, they traveled to southeastern Idaho to meet with representatives from the Shoshone-Bannock reservation near Pocatello. During the consultation, the chief of the tribe, who was a farmer, gave each of the census staff a small bag of potatoes, but he gave John a 50-pound bag of potatoes because he was the director. John got a real kick out of this, being given such a big, heavy bag, and when they took the group picture, you could see he had the biggest smile of anyone. While the number of us who worked with John is shrinking, his contributions to the agency continue today. I've talked about some of his big accomplishments, but many things you never saw or heard had an equally significant impact. Decisions on people, adjustments to policy, and hard-fought battles on behalf of the Census Bureau. John was a leader in every organization where he worked. Again, he was the highest career employee for the 2000 census. He was president of NORC, and he returned to the Census Bureau as the director. John carried the weight of those positions the same way he carried that 50-pound sack of potatoes, with confidence, competence, and of course, a big smile. It is a privilege for me to reflect on his time and legacy. Thank you.
Cal Crowder will share his thoughts and memories of Stewart Tolnay.
So I'm feeling a big sense of responsibility right now. I am one of dozens of people who would love to be up here memorializing Stu. He was just that important to so many people. So bear with me, I think I'll get through it. So let me start with an overview of Stu's research. Stu was recognized as one of the preeminent experts in historical demography, but he also made substantial contributions in the study of racial stratification, family change, residential mobility, migration, and segregation. He published hundreds of articles and chapters, most in top journals in sociology and demography, and was the author or editor of several award-winning books. For example, his book, A Festival of Violence, with co-author E.M. Woody Beck, was a groundbreaking work showing the connections between lynching in the postbellum South and local population and economic dynamics. Stu and Woody dispelled the notion that lynchings were simply impassioned and unpredictable interpersonal events, revealing them as important tools for racialized labor control employed especially in seasons of high demand for labor and slim profit margins. In his follow-up work, Stu made equally impressive contributions to our collective knowledge of the demographic and economic plight of Black families during the time of the Great Migration. Stu's work challenged conventional ideas, conventional narratives that blamed the growing social and economic crisis of northern and western cities in the late 20th century on the influx of, quote, uneducated and unsophisticated southern migrants. And in many ways, Stu's work stands as an important challenge to the now too common practice of vilifying migrants for broader political failures and economic violence. In fact, Stu's work stands as the best kind of social demography, connecting population processes to broader social, economic, and political dynamics, and both spatial and historical contingencies. While Stu was a hugely successful researcher, he was perhaps an even more influential teacher and mentor for legions of graduate students and undergraduate students. He was absolutely frugal in his personal dealings. As we all know, he ate the same exact lunch every day for about 40 years, but he was incredibly generous with his students. Stu's commitment to undergraduate education was evidenced by inspiring classes and, more importantly, by his involvement of undergraduate students in his research. Contracting Stu's infectious love for discovery, many of his undergraduate research partners went on to study at the nation's top graduate programs. In 2008, Stu received formal recognition for his commitment to undergraduate training, winning the university's Honors Excellence in Teaching Award. And in 2011, Stu was named as the Department of Sociology's Excellence in Graduate Training Award recipient, highlighting a long and distinguished record of developing and mentoring the next generation of population scientists, some of whom are in the room right now. Stu's commitment to his students was shaped by his own unique educational and professional trajectory. After starting out at Everett Community College, Stu earned his BA, MA, and PhD, all from the University of Washington. Along the way, he also completed a fellowship with the East-West Population Institute that took him and his then new wife, Patty Glenn, hi Patty, you're out there I know on video watching right now, to Iran in the late 1970s of all places. Stu's first job after completing his PhD was in the sociology department at the University of Georgia, and a few years later, he took a similar position at the University of Albany, where he helped to fuel the most productive period in the department's history. During his time at Albany, Stu assembled a very diverse group of demographers and quasi-demographers with little history of collaboration to successfully compete for an NICHD Population Center grant, and then led the Center for Social and Demographic Analysis during its most formative years. In 2000, Stu accepted an opportunity to return to Seattle in his alma mater. He served as the chair of the sociology department at UW from 2003 to 2008 and filled important leadership roles in our Center for Studies in Demography and Ecology. In fact, one quality that I think sets Stu apart from others with similar levels of success in research is his unyielding commitment to service. He served on and chaired multiple review panels for the NIH. He also served on the editorial boards for several top journals, including the American Sociological Review, and he was the editor-in-chief of Demography from 2011 to 2013. Perhaps most important was the fact that Stu was a steady influence in every department in which he worked. He was rarely the loudest voice in the room, probably never the loudest voice in the room, but was regularly the voice most heated. Stu was also sneaky cool. Contrary to his air of nerdiness, Stu had great taste in music and was a connoisseur of good beer, an accomplished writer of fiction, and a really stellar athlete. Many people will attest to this, with great frustration over having base hits stolen by Stu at shortstop. More importantly, Stu's colleagues will uniformly praise Stu's generous spirit, thoughtfulness, wit, and calm demeanor. Stu was and will be remembered as a genuinely nice person who made the field of demography his life and inspired many others to do the same. So thanks very much.
David Swanson will share his remarks about Farhat Yusuf.
So Farhat was born in Delhi, India in 1940, and with partition and Indian independence, the family moved to Pakistan. At age 16, his father died. He was a barrister. So Farhat took on the role of having to help care for his mother and his siblings, and also ended up finishing, because he knew the advantages of being involved in higher education, at the University of Punjab, and went on to get a master's degree in statistics there. That was followed by a PhD in demography at Australian National University. He moved around several places, did other things, but basically made a career when he came back to Australia at Macquarie University, where he founded a groundbreaking program in undergraduate demography. And that's a position he held when he retired. He was an elected member of the the Order of Australia, which is a high honor. And he was also remembered very well in the Muslim Times, a newspaper published in Australia. I got to know Farhat through IUSSP meetings, ended up collaborating with him on a couple books and several journal articles, and miss him very much. A lot of the work that he did was with IUSSP, which is not surprising. He and I shared an interest in business demography, so I label him as a person with broad interest, but really focused on applied demography. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all our speakers tonight who honored our colleagues who passed last year. And I would like also to invite anyone else who wants to share memories, reflections on the legacy of our dear friends and colleagues. Yes, Jane, please.
I want to bring Doug Ewbank and Hilary Page together. The three of us shared an office. Is it on?
Yes.
Hilary, Doug, and I shared an office as graduate students at the Office of Population Research at Princeton, and it was an incredible experience. Three very different people in one little garret with sloping roofs and bookcases under the eaves, and how long ago? A pencil sharpener on top of the bookcase. Hilary and I were the same size. Doug was 6'8" and ducked through. And Doug began piling his computer output right in front of the pencil sharpener. And finally, one day we said, "Doug, what are you doing?" And he cracked up. For him, it was waste space. For us, we could walk right up to it. It was an amazing experience. And then Hilary. Stan mentioned that Hilary and Ron met at OPR, got married, but what he didn't say was they were married in Ansley Cole's home. If anybody wants to see pictures, I just pulled them up on my phone. And again, another story. But then there was Doug after the injection that was supposed to help with pain and caused a cord stroke that left him initially paralyzed from the neck down. And my voice quivers when I went to see him in rehab and thought about what he was facing. And he faced it with courage and was able to recover to a great extent and decided he really was going to live his life and live his life well. I say all of this because I loved both of them, but also people are so important to us in our field, and the kinds of connections that everyone talked about tonight are so important to us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Anyone else who wants to share memories, reflections? Yes, please.
Thanks. I'll be sharing for Saiot. I may get a bit emotional as I speak, but just bear with me. So this is something that I wrote for my center for Saiot. So Saiot was my research center's longtime mentor and friend. He was someone the researchers at my center looked up to. He developed many careers, served as an inspiration to many, and always remained open, cheerful, and positive. Personally, I've benefited immensely from his selfless mentorship. I've lost a mentor, colleague, and a friend, and many of the colleagues at my center shared this sentiment. The message that I gave to colleagues was that the biggest tribute to Saiot as we progress in our careers would be to continue our research on aging in Singapore and the region for improving the lives of older adults and their families, and to strive to be a selfless mentor like him. He will be missed. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I just wanted to say, I wish I could say more about Saiot because it's been several years since I saw him, but I did want to say about Saiot that when I started working with colleagues in Japan, I was so amazed at the regard and the esteem in which they held him because I knew him when he started as a student. He was unpretentious, he was warm, he was engaging, he folded everyone into what he was doing, and what he accomplished created such an extraordinary legacy on research on aging in Japan. But I did want to say something personal about Tom Merrick, who was, I got my master's in demography at the time in the early 1980s when Tom was one of my first professors. And he was a part of that sort of legendary department with Henry Shryock and Jay Siegel and Conrad Teuber and others who had come from census and who were, at the center of this. And he lit a sort of he was one of the first people who lit the Brazil bug in me and with a number of other people because of the research that he was doing. This is all before he went to PRB. And I will just say on a personal story, which is that I always think, I actually mention his legacy on teaching because he was very well organized. He would stand at the front of the class and he would say, today we're going to cover 1, 2, 3. He would always get through 1 and 2, and he would never get to 3. And then the next class, we would come in, and number 3 had become number 1, but there were always 3 things that he said he was going to cover, and he never got to the 3rd, and they just rolled over. And I want to say that I honor that legacy in my teaching to this day.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hans-Peter.
I want to say something about Gene Hammel. I have the honor that the 2nd and 3rd entry on my CV are co-authored papers with Gene, who I got to Berkeley in '92, he freshly retired, but he embraced me in his research idea, got me to work on the 1492 Croatian census and showed me what good mentoring is for, showed me also how data allows you to understand kind of distant societies, where in that case you could no longer go back. And anyway, I'm proud to have spent some time with Gene, that he shaped me very early in my career, and his enthusiasm, his passion for data, his just vision kind of carried me forward. Also, I want to say a few words about Doug Ewbank, who, an incredible story. I actually gave my job talk on that fatal day he got his injection. And so he was key for me to, it's getting me excited about Penn, and kind of seeing his recovery and his persistence was just really remarkable. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to share memories, thoughts? No? Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight and for sharing your thoughts, remarks, memories about our colleagues. We appreciate this. Thank you.